McLaren went from being double champions in 2025 to being miles behind everybody else in 2026.
Championship teams aren't supposed to fall apart overnight. Yet, that's exactly what many believe happened to McLaren after a weekend that exposed cracks beneath one of Formula One's strongest campaigns. Now the team is making major changes, but the reason behind them goes far beyond one bad race. So what on earth happened? The fall from the top. McLaren finished the 2025 season holding almost everything the sport has to offer. The team won the Constructors' Championship with 833 points and 14 race wins, sealing that crown early at the Singapore Grand Prix, with rounds still left on the calendar. Lando Norris took the driver's title by the thinnest margin the sport allows, finishing on 423 points, just 2 clear of Max Verstappen on 421, with Oscar Piastri third on 410. It was McLaren's 10th Constructors' title, their first driver's championship since Lewis Hamilton in 2008, and their first championship double since 1998. That success did not fall out of the sky. McLaren had dragged themselves up from one of the slowest cars on the grid in early 2023 to genuine frontrunners by the end of that same year. Then Constructors' Champions in 2024, then double champions in 2025. The MCL 39 became the yardstick the rest of the field was measured against. It was built on a level of tyre management that rivals openly called a black art, on relentless in-season development, and on a bold design that kept both drivers fighting for wins right across the year. By the time they arrived at their title-winning season, the drivers felt like nothing could touch them.
Here we have everything we need and everything it takes to fight at the top and be the best.
That confidence was earned, and for one full season, it was completely justified. Then the sport rewrote the rulebook underneath them, and the ground gave way. The 2026 regulations were one of the biggest simultaneous resets in modern Formula One history, tearing up the chassis, the power unit, and the tyres all in the same off-season. McLaren's own technical staff described the sheer volume of the redesign as almost unprecedented. Every single team effectively started again from a blank sheet of paper, and the champions were about to learn they had started from further back than anybody. By the middle of 2026, the car that had swept the previous year was regularly only the 4th fastest machine on the track, and at times clinging to the very back of the front-running group. Mercedes had seized control of the championship, and their young star Kimi Antonelli was winning the large majority of the early races. Week after week, the silver cars pulled away while the papaya ones scrapped in the pack behind. The order of the sport had flipped almost overnight. The scale of that flip was laid bare in public. On the 5th of August 2026, the official Formula One account posted a side-by-side comparison of the drivers' standings after exactly 11 rounds of 2025 against the same stage of 2026. A year earlier, those 11 rounds had produced a thrilling three-way war. Norris and Piastri trading blows inside the same garage while Verstappen charged from behind to keep the title alive deep into the season. This time, that war was gone. Fans replying under the post reached for the same word again and again, one-sided. The cold numbers backed them up. After the 2026 Hungarian Grand Prix, the 11th round of the year, the constructors' table read Mercedes on 379 points, Ferrari on 307, and McLaren down in third on 220, a gap of 159 points to the leaders, with Red Bull breathing down their necks on 177. The Drivers' Championship stung just as much. Antonelli led the whole field on 219 points. Hamilton and Russell filled the places behind him, and the reigning world champion Lando Norris sat all the way down in 5th on 128, with Piastri 7th on 92. By that point, McLaren had scored a single Grand Prix victory in the entire season, and it had only just landed. The lap time was only half of the misery. The car itself was, by the driver's own accounts, horrible to drive. After the British Grand Prix, Norris described the MCL 40 as not a nice car to drive, and maybe one of the hardest cars he had ever driven in Formula One. At other moments across the season, he reached for an even harsher word and simply called it undrivable. Piastri was every bit as blunt, saying the machine had no real strengths at all, with the deficit spread everywhere rather than sitting in one fixable place. The car was especially weak through low-speed corners. It fought to keep its tires in the right temperature window, and it came undone in gusting wind and shifting grip. The deepest low point had arrived even earlier, and it was the kind of failure that empties the color from a garage. At the Chinese Grand Prix in Shanghai, both McLarens failed to even start the race. A double did not start, caused by terminal electrical and battery trouble on each car. Norris's problem was a software fault in the battery system, while Piastri's was a hardware defect in an auxiliary auxiliary part linked to the battery, and Stella admitted it was quite exceptional to suffer two terminal problems on the same component at the same time. A team that had been sealing titles with races to spare was now watching both of its cars sit silent on a Sunday afternoon. So one question hung over the entire paddock, and it was an uncomfortable one. How does a team fall this far, this fast, in a single winter? How do you go from the best car on the grid to a machine your own champion calls undrivable in the space of a few months? The answer was a chain of decisions, and that chain started long before the 2026 car ever turned the wheel. Why it all broke. McLaren made the choice that would shape their 2026 season while they were still busy winning 2025. Locked in one of the closest title fights in years, the team kept a huge share of its engineering attention pointed at the old car deep into the season. Stella was open about the trade-off, explaining that having been in the championship so tight with Verstappen, they needed to keep paying attention to the MCL39 to maximize their performance race by race, because the challenge from Verstappen was becoming more and more material. That focus won them the title by 2 points in Abu Dhabi. It also delayed their full commitment to the new project. The cost of that delay showed up quickly. The MCL40 reached pre-season testing later than ideal and needed far more on-track learning than the cars of teams who had thrown themselves at the new rules earlier. Technical director Neil Holdy later admitted that the decisions taken to secure the 2025 drivers' title forced McLaren to chase during the opening races, while rivals had started their 2026 work sooner. Weight piled onto the problem because the launch car came in slightly over the minimum limit, which pulled resource towards simply making it legal before real performance work could even begin. As reigning constructors champions, McLaren also sat under the most restrictive wind tunnel and simulation limits of anyone on the grid, which made splitting attention between two very different cars even harder. The second crack was deeper, because it sat inside the philosophy of the car itself. Once the team fully understood the new rules and could study rivals on track, it became clear that some of their early aerodynamic choices had been wrong. Stella owned it plainly, saying that during development they adopted some directions from a conceptual point of view that as they learned more about the 2026 regulations, they were now redirecting, and that this kind of aerodynamic convergence normally takes 1 or 2 months, leaving them roughly 2 to 3 months behind the top teams. The MCL40 was draggy and short of downforce compared with Mercedes. Stella pinned the typical gap at 3 to 4 tenths of a second, with roughly 70% of it in the corners and 30% on the straights. Worse still, the one weapon that had defined the 2025 car simply vanished. Stella conceded that McLaren was not as competitive as it had been in terms of tyre conditioning and degradation. The very black art that used to win them races on Sunday. A changed car architecture, higher brake cooling demands from a much more powerful electric motor, smaller tyres, and lower overall downforce all chipped away at the strength that had made them so consistent. The team that once nursed its rubber better than anyone now had a car with no reliable strength to lean on. The third crack came from the engine bay, and it was one McLaren had not felt in years. For the first time since reuniting with Mercedes, being a customer team became a clear disadvantage. Stella said it directly in Monaco, explaining that never before had they felt being a customer team put them on the back foot, and that it was not about being a lower priority, but about having fewer chances to integrate, to stay on the same timeline for reliability fixes, and to combine chassis and power unit work the way a full works team can. Mercedes, the works team, simply extracted more performance and more reliability from these complex new units. The reliability sheet made grim reading. Beyond the double failure in China, Norris needed a new battery in Japan despite starting the weekend with a fresh one, then retired in Monaco with a terminal power unit fault and suffered a gearbox issue in Canada. The team broke curfew twice at Monaco and Barcelona while chasing problems late into the night. By the Belgian Grand Prix, Norris took a 10-place grid penalty to fit a fourth power electronics unit, the brain of the hybrid system, so the team could finally access Mercedes' latest reliability fixes. McLaren was the last of the Mercedes-powered teams to receive that updated spec because it had run less mileage than Williams and Alpine. Then came a self-inflicted wound buried in the gearbox. Unlike its engine partners, McLaren designs and builds its own gearbox, and it had picked shorter gear ratios based on early incomplete estimates of how the new power unit would deploy its energy. Those ratios forced the drivers to shift up earlier and more often than Mercedes, which hurt both acceleration and the crucial job of recovering energy under the new electric-heavy rules. The ratios are locked for the season, with only one mid-season change permitted, and McLaren chose not to use that single joker because of the cost under the budget cap, preferring to spend that money on the chassis instead. The straight-line pain was measurable. Norris was around 11 km/h slower than Antonelli reaching Kops at Silverstone, and about 9 km/h down on Russell into Turn 4 in Austria. The last crack was one of timing. McLaren's early upgrades gave them false hope before dropping them back. The Miami package produced a strong weekend, with Norris winning the sprint from pole and finishing second in the Grand Prix, while a fuel system fault back in testing had already forced the team to fully strip down the MCL40 at the Barcelona shakedown. Then in Canada, a new front wing badly underperformed on debut, leaving Norris 1.5 seconds off the pace, and it was shelved before being reworked and reintroduced at Barcelona, where he took a podium. Every effective step a rival brought was worth around 3/10, and while McLaren paused and refined, the others kept marching forward. The champions had fallen completely out of sync.
We've always been playing a bit of catch-up, so it's time we make a change.
That was the honest state of things at the halfway mark. McLaren had diagnosed the disease with brutal clarity: a late start, a flawed concept, a customer team gap, and an upgrade cycle out of rhythm. Diagnosing it was one thing, fixing all of it under a fixed budget, while Mercedes kept pulling away and the season kept ticking, was a completely different mountain to climb. So the real question became how exactly they planned to climb it. The drastic changes. McLaren answered that question by treating the entire season as a war of development. From the very start, Stella framed 2026 as not much about the starting point, but much more about the race to upgrade the car, and the team had deliberately protected budget room to keep pushing parts onto the car rather than leaning on the launch design. Stella described the season as a pure race of upgrades, where the pecking order among the top teams would come down to who brought effective packages and how often, all under the shared $215 million cost cap. The plan was simple to say and brutal to execute: out-develop and out-deliver everyone else. The heart of the plan was a full change of direction. After studying the faster cars, McLaren accepted that some of its founding aerodynamic ideas had to be thrown out. Stella put it clearly after the recovery began, saying that the main aspect of the new upgrades was that they introduced parts following a slightly different concept in some areas of the car, and that after delivering the MCL40 and studying the concepts on cars that were faster than theirs, they realized they needed to correct the course. This was a rethink of the fundamentals, aimed straight at how the car handled airflow and generated downforce. The rebuild started at the very front of the car. A revised front wing was first trialed in Canada, introduced around Monaco, then refined and raced successfully from Barcelona onward, all in the service of one goal: more uniform loading across its span, so the air leaving its trailing edge would feed the rest of the car cleanly. In his technical breakdown, Gary Anderson explained that because the front wing sets up the entire downstream flow, that cleaner, more even loading became the critical enabler for everything behind it. Once the flow was tidied at the nose, the side pods, barge boards, and floor could finally be tuned to exploit it. Then came the big one. The Hungary package, brought to the last race before the summer break, was the first real expression of the redirected concept, and some of its parts arrived so late they were flown in on Friday night for Saturday installation. It centered on a new floor and floorboard, revised barge boards, reworked splitters along the floor's leading edge, and vanes ahead of the rear tires to control inboard tire squirt and better seal the underfloor. Anderson highlighted how each piece only worked because the front wing flow had been cleaned up first, letting the whole system pull together into stronger vortices, better underfloor sealing, and a more efficient diffuser. The cleverest work sat at the rear corners. Anderson identified 3 separate jobs done by the revised rear brake ducts and their divided exits. They extracted hot air from the brakes. They improved the diffuser by pulling more tire squirt upward, and most importantly, they added aerodynamic load directly to the unsprung rear corner. That third job matters for handling, because load applied straight to the tire does not have to travel through the suspension, which gives the driver more stable, more consistent rear grip in the critical braking and turn-in phase. McLaren even tidied the main cooling exit on the engine cover, shrinking it to cut wasted drag now that the cleaner upstream flow allowed it. There was one more radical idea waiting in the wings. McLaren developed its own version of the active rotating rear wing, nicknamed the Macarena, which flips over in a straight line mode to shed drag. An attempted debut in Austria was abandoned after final garage checks showed it was not ready, but it was successfully tested in Hungary practice, where the mechanical and aerodynamic data matched the simulations. Stella called it a complicated project and confirmed a positive sign-off, with a full race debut planned for a future high-speed track like Monza or Baku rather than Hungary. At the same time, closer work with Mercedes on the power unit began to pay off, with updated engine specifications and reliability fixes arriving around the Belgian Grand Prix. Then Hungary delivered the payoff nobody expected expected to be this big. Norris took pole and won the race, McLaren's first victory of the entire 2026 season, finishing more than 15 seconds clear of Verstappen. On the ground, the difference was obvious to the watching experts.
McLaren produced a really good race car with that new floor, the new aero package they had based around the new floor, which was superb.
That new floor did more than win a single race. It shifted the natural order of the whole grid for a weekend, and it dragged McLaren back into a fight they had been locked out of for months. The papaya car was suddenly the class of the field again, and for the first time all season, the dominant silver machines had been beaten fair and square on pace.
For the first time this year, the Mercedes was not the best car.
Stella credited the leap almost entirely to those upgrades, admitting the team had not even expected the step to be big enough for pole or such dominant race pace. And this kind of comeback was not new territory for McLaren, because the whole rise from the back of the grid to double champions had been built on exactly this ability to reinvent a car midstream.
We've been able to really turn our car around and make it the strongest on the grid.
Here is the twist though, and Stella was the first to say it out loud. One brilliant high downforce weekend was only a single data point, and he was careful to warn that it did not automatically make Hungary a permanent turning point or a guarantee of regular wins. The team was now back in the race of upgrades, while fighting for the lead again, but still needed more parts to contend consistently. And the maths of the season was already settled, with a gap of 159 points to Mercedes. Defending either title was gone, so the mission changed shape. Neil Holdy confirmed that smaller upgrades were planned for the next run of races after the summer break, with a potentially bigger package targeted for Baku, after which the team would weigh whether to keep developing the MCL 40 or switch its resources fully to the 2027 car. The drastic changes were real, and they worked, but they arrived to win races and bank knowledge for the future, rather than to save a championship that had already slipped away. From double champions to firefighters to genuine race winners again, all in half a season. The recovery is real, and the second half of the year will show just how complete it can become. If this breakdown helped it all make sense, click on one of the cards on your screen to see more videos like this.